What's up, Karizzma crew? This is your captain speaking. Today we're going to be ranking every Flood mission in the mainline Halo FPS games from worst to best. Needless to say, this is just my opinion, but I'd love to hear how you guys would rank these missions in the comments below. Now let's get into it.
Cortana's in there somewhere.
Cortana is easily the worst mission on this list for me, and I know a lot of you are going to agree with me on this one. If I can keep it real for a minute, I usually just skip this mission when going back and playing through Halo 3. I truly think it's awful. The Flood pure forms are just overwhelmingly annoying, and the mission really overstays its welcome. A big portion of the map has enemies funneling through a narrow play space, and it really makes it a chore going through this mission. And oh, how can I forget about those Flood doors? Whoever's idea it was to design them that way, I both applaud you for your creativity and question what is wrong with you, because to this day, they still gross me out. I will say this though, the cutscene where you reunite with Cortana is great and really tugs on those heartstrings. Up next is the library. If you didn't put Cortana last, you most likely put this mission last. While I think the play space is a lot better than Cortana, it definitely overstays its welcome. The combat is very repetitive, and the level itself, especially in the original graphics, is very dull in its design. That's not to say I prefer the anniversary graphics, because I certainly think the level loses its intended vibe. But there are some positives, like clear arrow markings to help the player at least navigate through the level better. I've seen people defend this mission, saying it gives you the feeling of how dreadful and overwhelming it should feel when trying to survive the Flood in an infected facility. And while that's an interesting way to look at it, a game in my opinion should prioritize gameplay first, and the gameplay is too repetitive in this level, making it one of the worst on this list.
What is it? That stench. I've smelled it before.
At number 10 is the Oracle. This mission overall isn't terrible, but honestly it doesn't have much going for it either. It just feels like the weaker half of a two-part mission, with the previous mission, the Arbiter, being much better. I like the atmosphere that the level builds, with the teasing of encountering the Flood at the beginning of the level, and the way the infection forms appear and reanimate the dead enemies in the room. However, the enemy encounters throughout the mission are mediocre at best. There's a very long elevator sequence that goes on for far too long and plays like a boring holdout section. And while the introduction of the Flood in the beginning of the level is good, they quickly play second fiddle to the heretic leader, who we end up fighting at the end of the level as a boss fight, which admittedly on paper is an interesting boss to fight, but the execution, quite frankly, wasn't very good. What I did like about the mission was the cutting of the cables and seeing the station entering freefall. I remember being so amazed seeing that happen for the first time as a kid. Next is Sacred Icon. Another mission that does beautiful environmental storytelling. Right from the beginning of the level, we get a really different and cool atmosphere. One of the most unique things of this level are the way you drop down the long elevator tubes, which by the way were a real treat to see once again in Halo Infinite. I always thought it was such a different and creative way to work around the technical limitations and load into different parts of the level. They had this really eerie soundtrack playing at that time as well. Another unique thing about this level is the introduction of the Sentinel Enforcer. I love the tease in the opening cutscene and the eventual reveal when you step into the wide open room. You aren't told how to tackle the situation, you simply have to try and figure out for yourself how to take down this behemoth of an enemy. What follows is a magical and breathtaking sequence where heavy snow is falling while you're on a floating platform going outdoors towards the next enemy encounter. Speaking of enemy encounters, this is the reason why I have to put the level down lower on this list. While the Sentinel Enforcer is cool and all, most of the Flood encounters are pretty dull, with the only memorable one being the final holdout section, which to be honest can be a little buggy at times when you have to go around the map hunting down the last remaining enemy in some corner to end the mission. So while it's far from the worst level, it still suffers the same fate as the Oracle in being the weaker half of a two-part mission. At number 8 is Keys, a mission that also feels a bit too long and likely the reason why so many people try to skip it with the Keys bump. I did not like the section where you jump down into the coolant and have to try to find your way back up into the ship. I just think that whole section could have been cut out and the mission would be better for it. That being said though, it was cool to see the Covenant take on the Flood in an open area, but what shines more in this level is the storytelling. Right off the bat, there's a sense of urgency in rescuing Captain Keyes, and although we all have somewhat of a sinking feeling that he isn't gonna make it, we power through and try to rescue him. The reveal of an infected Captain Keyes was really well done, and as a bonus, I really loved the terminal that was added in this mission in the anniversary edition of the game. It gives you such a great insight into how the Flood takes over your mind as you struggle to hold on to everything that you know and love. The most enjoyable section of this mission, in my opinion, is right after the reveal of an infected Captain Keyes. The pace really picks up as you try to escape at Flood-infested Truth and Reconciliation. You get your first encounter with the Spec Op elites, and of course, escaping with a Banshee was a cool way to end the mission.
And that's exactly what Halo is designed to do. Wipe the galaxy clean of all sentient life. You don't believe me? Ask him.
Up next is 2 Betrayals. Although not strictly a Flood mission, this mission was really important in the big picture of the Halo franchise. The true purpose of the Halo rings is revealed in the opening cutscene of the mission. We got to witness our first multi-faction battle in this mission. It's also the first mission in which Sentinels are the player's enemy. Right off the bat, you're trapped in a room with 4 Sentinels and have to find your way to take them down. Bungie has always been really smart about teaching the player how to tackle new enemies in a controlled environment before exposing them to a larger and much more challenging environment. We saw it with a Sentinel Enforcer in Sacred Icon, and trust me, we will be talking about this many times again later in this video. There is one thing, this level does suffer from repetitive level design though, as at this point in the game, you likely still have Assault on the Control Room fresh in your mind, and going backwards to the same copy and paste structures can get a bit dull. Luckily, the enemy encounters keep things fresh with the player stuck in the middle of the Sentinels, the Covenant, and the Flood's all-out war. The Banshee is also used exceptionally well in this level as a way to freshen up the way we navigate our way back. Narratively, it was clever to have the player use their shields to take down the generators. However, I do wish that the enemies wouldn't spawn in immediately after the shields got stripped down, because it forces the player to either memorize where the enemies will spawn or immediately spam nades or make a beeline for the exit, but that's just a nitpick, it's not a huge deal. The huge open area fight between the Covenant and the Flood at the end is always really cool to see and play because of the various ways you can tackle the mission.
We shall cut into the heart of this infestation, retrieve the icon, and burn any Flood that stand in our way.
At number 6 is Quarantine Zone. How can you not love a mission with such a banger soundtrack? Everything about this mission screams large scale, and everything seems like a race against time with big stakes. The humans are trying to get the sacred icon, while the Arbiter along with the elites race to reach it before the humans. We see more Sentinel Enforcers, and for the first time ever see the Flood operate vehicles. The mission is crafted very well with large outdoor driving sections broken up into small on-foot sections until you reach an admittedly boring gondola section. Although to be fair, even though the section is tedious, you can technically just hide for the duration of the ride. But the narrative is what really puts this mission higher up on the list for me. Seeing the Covenant's side and how they view the Index as the sacred icon, seeing how the Arbiter sneaks up on Miranda Keyes and Sergeant Johnson, and finally the revelation that the Prophets ordered Tartarus to execute the elites is all done so masterfully. If you weren't on board with the Arbiter's character up until this point, you definitely were now. Overall, a pretty good Flood level.
Pull up! Pull up! You did that on purpose, didn't you?
We're in the top 5 now, and at number 5 is the Maw. It was really cool seeing the Flood take over the Pillar of Autumn. I just wish the environment was more Flood contaminated like the mission Cortana from Halo 3, but of course I understand that that might not have been possible due to the technical limitations and also the time constraints. Also, I know I harped on about repeated assets, but because the Maw is all the way at the end of the game, I feel like it at least gives enough time for players to not have the Pillar of Autumn still fresh in their minds. The mission starts off pretty decent with some fun enemy encounters, but I still hate the engine room sequence. I've talked about this in my ranking best ending mission video, but I still don't think it has aged very well. It's not intuitive, and half the time the grenades and rockets don't even register on the vent. It's just not very fun. What is really fun is the final escape sequence, or as we know it, the Wardog run. Something that was really fresh and unique at that time. Also, if I'm not mistaken, the Maw is the only time in the series where we encounter flood combat forms with active camo, which if you haven't seen before, is just as terrifying as it sounds. Trust me.
Your pal. Where's he going? Earth. To finish what we started.
At number 4 is High Charity. Maybe some of you are surprised why High Charity is so far up on this list. Firstly, it's a relatively short mission and doesn't overstay its welcome. I love seeing how quickly the Flood takes over High Charity in just a matter of minutes. Trust me, that's gonna be an upcoming theme. And the environment really shows this. It doesn't just feel like the Flood are placed on a location that has been damaged, like the Maw. Instead, the map itself looks infected. The air looks polluted and dangerous to breathe. The mission continues to have some great AI versus AI battles from the mission that chronologically takes place before, which of course is the mission Gravemind. However, this time adding the Flood to the mix. But as I was saying, the environmental storytelling is really nice, with the Prophet of Truth still echoing his propaganda throughout High Charity by running away himself. And as you progress throughout the level, along with his false motivational speeches, you also start hearing the dark and ominous message from the Gravemind.
Parasite did not defeat the Forerunners, and it shall not defeat us.
The area with the floating platforms always mesmerized me as a kid. It all looks so grand and advanced, while also clashing with how savage and gruesome the Flood who've just invaded are. There are points in this level where there is no soundtrack in the background, which is rare in Halo, but it fits so well and it takes the creepiness to a whole nother level. Narratively, we also have to leave Cortana behind in the event she needs to detonate the Inamberclad and destroy the Halo rings, while the Arbiter, Johnson, and Miranda Keyes try to stop Tartarus. This is also the final mission in which we play Master Chief in Halo 2, and the ending cutscene has one of the most memorable lines in the game.
Don't make a girl a promise if you know you can't keep it.
At number 3 is the mission that started it all, 343 Guilty Spark. What an amazing twist in the game. Up until this mission, the narrative was simply defeating an army of aliens by getting to a massive super weapon before them. Nothing, and I mean nothing, in the story or the cover art hinted at something so dark and twisted. When it comes to environmental storytelling, it doesn't get any better than 343 Guilty Spark. The entire tone of the game changes as soon as you land into the swamp. It's eerie, it's silent, the lack of Cortana is noticeable. Something has clearly gone wrong here, but nothing is explicitly showing what went wrong. As you approach the facility, you see the Covenant fleeing from something or someone, but again, you have no idea who it is, what it is. As you make your way into the facility, you see dead enemies with a disgustingly large amount of blood everywhere, but once again, no sign of who did it. It gets the player wondering, what's going on? Where are the large battles? Where's the badass music? Where are the Marines? But just as you think you find a Marine, he's absolutely traumatized and starts firing at you.
Stay back! You're not turning me into one of those things! I'll blow your brains out! Get away from me!
He's screaming and clearly terrified, but still being vague about what threat he's seen. By that point, the player's curiosity is at an all-time high. What in the world happened? And as we open that dreaded locked door, a Marine collapses into our arms. We replay the recording in the Marine's heads-up display and witness the horror. Bungie once again masterfully implements their way of introducing new enemies by introducing only infection forms first and then introducing combat forms. This works not only from a gameplay perspective, but also an emotional perspective. You're led to believe that this popcorn flood isn't as terrifying as shown in the replay video, only for the game to throw another curveball right at you in the form of combat forms. As you try to escape the facility, you only end up going deeper until you finally find your way back to the swamp, and with a sigh of relief, link up with some Marines. You fight your way through some flood, at least somewhat confident having a little backup, and finally encounter the one the mission is named after. I'm of course talking about our least favorite light bulb, 343 Guilty Spark.
What is it? More brutes?
Worse.
Number 2 is Floodgate. Again, you might be surprised to see me rank Floodgate so high, and I think people either love this mission or hate it. I definitely fall into the former. Ever since the Flood was introduced in CE, I always shuddered to think what would happen if the Flood ever stepped foot on Earth, and that is exactly what we got in Floodgate. It's so amazing to see how quickly the Flood can change the landscape. Yes, it reuses a lot of assets from the previous mission, The Storm, but its vibe, tone, visuals, music, and encounters are completely different. The enemy encounters on this mission don't feel overwhelming or tedious at all, something other Flood missions seem to struggle with. For a change this time, most of the enemy encounters are head-on, and a huge reason for that is the extremely linear nature of this mission. But the fact is that it just works. The length of the mission is perfect in my opinion. It's short and sweet. Flood pure forms are also introduced in this mission, and they are once again introduced masterfully. You go face to face with just one of them before fighting many more, so the player understands what the enemy is and how to tackle them. We saw this in Sacred Icon, 2 Betrayals, and 343 Guilty Spark, and it's really good game design. Also, speaking of 343 Guilty Spark, we get a great throwback to another traumatized Marine, and fans of the series definitely appreciated that callback. Another thing I found really cool as a kid was teaming up with the elites to take on the Flood. I always thought having elite allies was so much fun, mostly because of their funny voice lines. The mission finally ends with a series of intense cutscenes. First is a tease of Cortana, then an interaction between Guilty Spark and Master Chief, and finally between Lord Hood and the Shipmaster. They're all done exceptionally well, and quite frankly is the point where the story really picks up the pace and starts to progress.
Halo. It's so new, unfinished. I'm not exactly sure what will happen when we fire it.
We'll head for the portal. And we'll all go home.
And that leaves the number 1 spot to the mission Halo from Halo 3. It was so cool coming full circle back to CE with the snowy vibe of Assault on the Control Room and 2 Betrayals. The Gravemind, furious with rage, throws flood after flood at you to stop you from reaching the control room. We even see flood drop pods, which is something I never thought I'd see. The enemy encounters are also pretty fun in this mission. The pure forms aren't as naggingly annoying as they are in the level Cortana, and there's enough space to maneuver and take cover. I would say having the Arbiter and Sergeant Johnson watching your back makes the first half of this mission more enjoyable. Speaking of Sergeant Johnson, his death comes as a total shock, but is executed really well. It is easily one of the most emotional moments in the series, and definitely tugs on those heartstrings. And finally, the mission ends with one of the coolest segments in not only the Halo franchise, but gaming history. The final escape with the Flood trying to stop you is so polished and still holds up today. It takes what worked from the Maw and makes it 10 times better. The music, the giant set pieces, and overall presentation is simply phenomenal. And that is my ranking of every Flood mission in Halo. If you watched all the way till the end, I really appreciate you and would love to hear what your favorite Flood mission is in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, Superman, punch that like button and subscribe for more Halo content. I'll see you guys in the next one.
Subscribe to Kaptain Karizzma.